Hello, my name is Wildstag, and thank you for tuning in to another book rant. Today I'm going to be covering this book, The Grey Bastards, a novel by Jonathan French. Content warning for all viewers. Rape, murder, slavery are talked about frequently in this book. I want you to know that before you go into the video. By the way, in case you weren't expecting it, spoilers for this book. I bought this book at a bookstore for fantasy and science fiction in San Diego called Mysterious Galaxy. The store was good, and I appreciated the books I bought there for the most part. Of the books that I bought there, the only one that I haven't read is The Baron of Magister Valley by Stephen Bruce. I covered another book I bought there here on this channel, Marjorie Liu's The Tangleroot Palace. That one I did enjoy. Another book I got there was Hollow Kingdom, a book that I'm going to spend some time ranting about, probably in another video next month. For now, I'm discussing The Grey Bastards. I paid about $16 for it. But what this one comes with, I may have paid additional money because of this, is a little signed sticker. Shows a little chicken with a sword riding a hog. I think it's supposed to be somewhat representative of this book. The Grey Bastards was first published in 2015, and this printing, the first paperback edition, is 2018. It's a book in a kind of fantasy Earth where multiple species exist. For example, one of them is default humans that live in a nation called Hispartha, and this is, for the most part, set in the Reconquista era of Spain. There's a portion in that peninsula that is barren, it's wasteland. It's the part of the nation that humans in this setting just never really were able to conquer. They weren't able to use it effectively. The book also features orcs. Orcs coming up from the south and crossing effectively the Strait of Gibraltar. In this case, the Strait of Gibraltar on the Hisparthan side is swampy and dreadful and a kind of almost nuclear waste in a way, in a magic sense. There, the elves native to the region and their shamans fought the orcs and their magic users during the first incursion by orcs. Their magic combined into some very weird monsters, some very weird environments, and it perverted the few humans that still lived there. The rest of the lot lands, as they are called, are settled by small, hardy communities of humans and their half-orc protectors. There's a couple other communities in this area, including centaurs, who are kind of bog-standard centaurs, except that one moon every year is the betrayer moon, and centaurs go into a rabid bloodlust and try to kill everything they can get their hands on. The only other people that really live in that region and have long-term that are not the elves, the centaurs, and a few humans are the descendants of the first halfling. These creatures, kind of similar to hobbits in Lord of the Rings, that same stature, same height. You see it in a lot of fantasy settings. But in this one, they are descended from one little person, a human little person who never grew past waist high, but was taken in as slave by a conqueror. I think it's almost in a Charlemagne sense. This little person was from south in what is implied to be the continent of Africa or something similar to it, this setting's version of it. He was sold into slavery up near the northern, the Mediterranean coast of Africa, and eventually made his way to this conqueror who conquered most of mainland Europe, or some part of it that mattered to the people there. This slave then was devoted to his master in what is one of the more obnoxious things about this story. I don't know how to put it. This little person served their master until their master became a god. And as the devoted servant of this God, he was given a, divine favor. He was given a wish that could be granted. And the slave wished to be in the master position in that relationship. Two things came of that. First, the little person bred true. Their descendants were the same height, but were not stunted. They were just naturally that size. So they are descended from the servant of an ascended god and have almost a feeling of stature above their side, which is fair. That's actually pretty cool. What isn't is that they're all born of a happy slave, and it's kind of just a gross thing to read. They are also served by some humans that were devoted to that ascended god as well. And halflings have traveled all over the world trying to find every relic of every one of this ascended god's servants. So those are the basic races you have to work with. Elves are reclusive and effectively Atlantean. Their kingdom is gone and they live sheltered away from everyone else, powerful enough in their own right to defend their enclaves, but not so powerful that they can't be taken prisoner and enslaved by humans. And even within this setting, there are other more kind of historic nations. The equivalent of the Ottomans still exist, and they still have hold over, the Mediterranean-esque parts of that world. And the name of the character that comes from that nation is kind of like an Arabian name, but it plays with a lot of kind of older tropes. The harem, the magic users that can twist people in utero. Always conniving and trying to find a way to supplant a European king. It's interesting if it were self-aware. And as is, the book is kind of fun, but not so enjoyable that its sins aren't unnoticeable. And it doesn't really work in certain ways. So there's the halflings, there's elves, there's centaurs, there's humans, there's orcs. Orcs are, in this setting, effectively the way they are in a lot of other fantasy settings. Invaders that just take over an area are always trying to expand. They are bloodthirsty, they are militaristic, they are lustful. Half-orcs can come about from the breeding of an orc and a human, and at least as far as we know in this story, every half-orc is the product of rape. So half-orcs only come about through an orc raping a human. We are never presented with a case of mutual love between an orc and a human. They are only through that one way. In Hispartha, half-orcs are all slaves, whether they are working as gladiators, whether they are working as miners, whether they are working for a Hispartan noblewoman, a lover. They are, in all ways, a slave class. The other thing about half-orcs is that they are not a self-sustaining population. And this is partly where the setting just does not gel well with anything I care for. It flat out states in one of the early chapters, all half-orc males are sterile. They cannot produce offspring. Which means that this entire society, this culture of half-orcs, is only sustained through victims of rape, raising their kids in a place where their half-orcs can grow mostly independently, mostly free. But those half-orcs are then almost completely pressed into self-defense roles. Half-orc women are capable of producing offspring, but the only examples we are given is half-orc women producing children with orcs, not with humans. And in this case, when a child is the product of a half-orc and an orc, they are called thrice. 3 of their grandparents are orcs, 1 is human. And those are stronger than their half-orc kin. They are stronger, bigger, more orc-like, but they've still got a lot of that humanity in them. And what really irritates me about this setting is that the story is set up as an independence movement, that all these half-orcs earned a place to call home, but their population is not self-sustaining. Human women or half-orc women have to be effectively raped by orcs to produce children to keep this population going. And like I said, there's no examples given of an orc being in a loving relationship, a mutually respective relationship with a human or a half-orc. Orcs are only there to conquer, to plunder, to rape. That is it. And so, given that orcs are effectively implied to be from fantasy Africa, their skin tone isn't explicitly dark like equatorial peoples. It's kind of grayish, but these people exist only to conquer, only to kill, only to rape. They don't have boats or ship rights of their own. All their invasion forces swim across the Straits of Gibraltar, that couple-mile distance between one continent and the other, and then move from there. These orcs exist solely to be an invading force. And half-orcs, for the most part, strive to be strong enough to be part of the elite cavalry units, in the same sense that a peasant human might want to be a knight. Half-orcs grow up wanting to be a hog rider, part of a hoof, as they're called, a cavalry unit of about 8 to 12 who are the elite soldier units of this region. They ride large boars capable of bearing them. Boars are aggressive fighters, more aggressive than stallions, but are smaller, shorter of leg. They are not as enduring a runner, but they're made for the harsh, thorny, cactus-like brush of that region. Half-orcs ride these boar into battle, doing strafing tactics against orcs. When you aren't thinking about the plot contrivance that half-orcs are not a self-sustaining population, the rest of the book is fun. It's a story about an already established character. He is already a member of a hoof. He is already an elite member of his society. He is serving the oldest living hoofmaster. So there's multiple hoofs throughout the region. Each one defends its lot. And the multiple lot lands are allotments given by Hispartha to half-orcs. After, as we find out, a half-orc rebellion, a slave revolt. So these people live in these regions, and one of the few remaining founders of this culture is the main character, Jackal's leader. Jackal is itself not his birth name, but a name earned when he became a member of the hoof. One of his friends, a thrice, is named Oates, and the other friend, the only female half-orc hoof in the whole region, is named Fetch, short for fetching, which is itself a name derived from a misogynist joke made by the chief of that unit when she was inducted into their order. It is, for the most part, a story of Jackal trying to overthrow the chieftain because what he's always wanted to be is the leader of that hoof. Jackal, his story is one of constant failure. First, a human noble ends up killed in the opening chapters of the book because of Jackal's refusal to bend the knee to a Hisparthan cavalero, as they're called, like a cavalier, really close in name. So this horseman comes upon him with a few noble youth, ones that are the spares in their families, sent to the lot lands to maybe earn a place or earn a name for themselves. Otherwise, they're there to be forgotten. A young man is killed in the opening chapter, and this sets in motion the rest of the story. Jackal now has to cover his tracks. It's a bunch of minor mysteries rolled into one, and as he fails repeatedly in a snowballing way, he learns more and more about the world he lives in. What he discovers is that the story he had been raised knowing, which was that these half-orc slaves untethered these boars from their caravans and rode them into battle, and because half-orcs are so much similar in strength to orcs, were able to mow down this orc unit, and in thanks they were given this land. That's the story Jackal grew up knowing. As he learns later in the story, that's all bullshit made up by both Hispartha and the chieftain of his hoof, because the actual truth is that half-orcs were for the most part used as slaves until some human magic users came up with an idea to end the incursion through the creation of a disease that would affect orcs. So they got a bunch of half-orcs, put them in cages, left them at the bottom of a mine, a lot of these half-orcs never having seen sunlight, and then one night the wizards summoned Rat, a literal ocean of rats, to just wash through, bite the half-orcs, to spread filth, to spread disease, and every morning they were asked, "Are you alive?" And the ones that were alive would respond in the affirmative. This happened for months. And then finally, the wizards had this almost complete product. what ended up happening was that the Half-Orcs revolted. The founding Half-Orcs, the ones that founded the Hoofs, were all immune to the disease and could carry it within their bodies. They were effectively nuclear bombs waiting to blow up. If the Hisparthans or the Orcs wanted to invade, the disease would spread again, and it would be another plague killing millions. Neither the Orcs nor the humans wanted to lose their lives to a disease, and so they let the lot lands exist as a holding area where no one would invade through it, but they would wait for the Half-Orcs to disappear. And since Half-Orcs aren't a self-sustaining population, that works. And the story snowballs from there. It's all convoluted in different ways. And it brings me to the last part of the book that really irritates me. And that is that early in the story, there's this Slug Man, I guess, this human that seems to be able to control the monsters created by the blending of the elf and orc magic. These giant slugs that eat everything, and the orcs are afraid of. And so what becomes of this is the slain noble Cavallero is sent to the Slug Man to be consumed, for him to disappear into the bog and never be seen again. The young noble's horse escapes and runs back to home, which is to the home of a Marquesa, this young noble's mother. This sets in motion a whole investigation about, why is my son dead? Why is his horse here? This is a noble woman. She wants her son's killer to be held at trial to have justice brought down upon him. Jackal feels betrayed, and so he goes, invades the Slug Man's swamp. There they see an elf prisoner, which is unheard of. He realizes she is a free elf that lives in the lot lands, in the forest and the mountains and the valleys of the lot lands where the elves live, but his only thought is to free her. Shortly after, he discovers, or is told as much, that she is pregnant with an orc child. All of a sudden, this elf girl is treated as a MacGuffin. She has a half-orc child inside her. That's really important because it's almost completely unheard of. No one's ever seen this before. It could be really powerful. It's a red herring. The half-orc child doesn't really matter later in the story because there's no real benefit that we are given of being half-orc and half-elf aside from just being a rare gem. And then later it's revealed that Fetching is herself half-elf and half-orc. Ultimately, she's only of value to the Slug Man, who is a human trying to return his lands to their previous state, and who is insane and believes that spilling orc and elf blood upon this one spot will bring his god's favor upon the land and return it to what it used to be. To this Slug Man, a half-elf, half-orc is the perfect blending of those two species, such that sacrificing it upon this altar might be useful in some way to restoring the land that has been ravaged by both elf and orc magic. But then he's killed, and ultimately he's not even the primary antagonist of the book. The chieftain is, because of his machinations. It's mostly a red herring plot that only helps because at the end the conflict needs something to happen. In this case, orcs are invading in larger numbers than ever before, and people need to stand up to it. Certain groups do, and the halflings with their human citizens defend at one place. Hisparthans defend against another group. The rest of the half-orc hoofs defend united against one group of orcs. And then lastly, the main characters with 6 riders, a few of them exiled, a few of them still hanging out with them from a previous event, decide to do hit-and-run tactics as best they can. Ultimately, they get surrounded. And finally, the elves show up, riding their deer. And ultimately, the elves wouldn't have helped the half-orcs. The only reason they did is because this elf from their community begs them to help these half-orcs. Really, the only purpose this elf has in the narrative is to serve as a MacGuffin and then as a diplomat. But the diplomacy happens off screen, and the MacGuffin is a red herring. So she's just there to advance the plot in a weird and pointless way. And I guess I ended that sentence with a question mark, but ultimately it makes very little sense to me. And I think a lot of the problems I have with this book could be solved by one simple change. Make half-orcs not sterile. Make them a accidentally new species created from the merging half-human and half-orc blood. Allow them to be a self-sustaining population, but just that the resources are so few in the land that they have earned for themselves, so that they have a small population, that they cannot defend against an army from the north or from the south unless they all group up together, but that they are still able to sustain themselves without needing human females or half-orc females to be raped. Because it ultimately comes back to that. The rape aspects of this story, this setting, just kind of seem unnecessary to me. You could make half-orcs just a new population in the same way that the halflings just came into being because of a miracle from a new god to his servant. The half-orcs could have had something similar to that, and instead they don't. And so it's just a bunch of men striving against the whole world, and ultimately when they die, if no new half-orcs are created, it goes back to being a land that can be conquered by anyone who has the strength to hold it. The setting doesn't work in several ways, but it tries to make itself work, and so they need this nuclear deterrent of this disease that can be kind of controlled by the chieftain of Jackal's Hoof. And when the chief dies in the end, his disease is passed on to one other thrice, who is an infant. This child taken in by the elves, who are seemingly immune to this disease, so that the elves can find a way to cure this child of a disease thrust upon it by the dying chief. The chief wants that child as a nuclear deterrent, and the elves having that baby in their protection, means that Hispartha can't just invade easily. But no one of adult intelligence can control that disease. So it is building into a book 2 where the half-orcs have to unite and defend themselves against some invader, but it just doesn't feel right. And a lot of this feels like it could just be fixed with making half-orcs a self-sustaining population. I don't know why that was too difficult for the author to write, but it doesn't sit right with me that the whole basis of this civilization is rape babies. It's not that I have a problem with the sex or the murder, the betrayal, any of those themes or those elements in a story. It really is just that it's unnecessary and could be fixed relatively easily. I, as a reader, as a member of the audience, I do not see why it needed to be this way from the start. And moving forward, from what I can tell, each of the following books, the ones that are currently published, follow a different member of the 3 main characters. So the next one follows Fetching, as she now is in charge of the most powerful hoof and has the respect of all the other hoofs. And it looks like there's an invasion from Hispartha that they're going to need to defend against. The third one seems to follow Oates. I may pick the books up. I'm interested in that independence movement part of the narrative, but the foundation for this setting just doesn't sit right with me. If I don't pick up books 2 or 3, it is definitely because of that foundation. It's an interesting book, and I almost certainly didn't do it justice here. And there are large sections of the story I left out because they weren't directly relevant to my issues with it. And those portions of the book are good. I could praise them if I cared to, but the glaring issues with this book outweigh that good in my mind. And so if I do read it, it's only because curiosity is killing this cat. There's no burning need for me to continue the story. But maybe your experience with this book will be different. I don't know. There is an audience for this series. I'm not entirely certain I'm part of it, though. My name is Wildstag, and thank you for tuning in to another book rant.